Happy December, everybody, and I hope you're enjoying your crisp winter weather or maybe warm weather wherever you are in the world. So good to have everybody with us. We are going to be inspiring change and sharing our actionable insights today on nature-based solutions, which I'm very curious about myself, having worked at WWF in the past. So we're going to go through basically, well, our goal today is to come up with 5 ways to include these nature-based solutions into your sustainability strategy. And Sophie is going to help us do that. I'll introduce her in a minute. To understand a bit more why nature-based solutions are a game changer for businesses. And then we're going to look at practical strategies to incorporate them into your sustainability goals. We're going to overcome challenges with impactful nature-based solutions. And we're also going to hear Sophie's vision for nature-based strategies in the next 5 years. So today's sessions, as always, will be interactive, collaborative, and inclusive. So again, I invite you all to use the chat to network, engage, and ask questions specifically to Sophie. So the chat is yours. Please share your name, your location, your organization, whatever you want to share. And again, keep dropping your questions in there as we go through the interview with Sophie today, so that when we get to the end and we open up for our Q&A, you can ask those questions directly to the speaker. I'll just call on you, so be ready to unmute. Hopefully everyone's on mute until then. And Impact Leaders Lab, for those of you that don't know, is a private community that we built just for people like you, as a select group of more than 2,000 change leaders and senior sustainability professionals. And the goal is really to help you accelerate your professional development and help you share best practice and solve problems with like-minded peers. And so for those of you that don't know me, I'm Shannon Houde, and my mission really is to get the right people into the right roles so that you can advance your careers to shape a more sustainable world. Some of my clients have called me a career magician. Others say I'm a career therapist. Some say I'm a transformational life coach. But I really see myself as your career journey partner. So no matter where you are on your path, I have shaped 4 kind of key coaching programs to cover both your career transition, but also your leadership development. So you can start anywhere you want on this whole journey map here. It might be that you're looking to break into this space or move within it in terms of your job and your career, or you're looking to overcome imposter syndrome, burnout, you want to get promoted. We cover pretty much anything and everything that comes up for you as you are trying to shape this scalable change in your roles out in the world. So as a professional certified coach myself, I have trained with the International Coach Federation, and I've spent more than 25 years now in recruitment. Actually, I think even more. It's my first job out of university. And 20 years of that as a practitioner and a management consultant in sustainability. So before it was even called sustainability, I think we were still calling it corporate social responsibility back then, in the late 90s. But I've supported more than 4,000 change leaders like you to excel into their next stage of their careers with impact. But welcome, Sophie. It's so great to see you again, and thank you for making time for us in the darkness of the morning there in the northwest of the U.S. Sophie is a distinguished senior sustainability executive with an impressive track record spanning more than 20 years. As the Chief Sustainability Officer at International Paper, Sophie has crafted and executed IP's sustainability strategy, integrating it with the company's business processes and strategies, and then advancing IP's commitment to sustainable forestry. In addition to her role at IP, she contributes her expertise as the Vice Chair of the Board of Trustees of the American Forest Foundation, She's an advisory board member for the Center for Business and Environment at Yale, and is also the co-chair of the Forest Solutions Group at WBCSD. Previously, she spent 7 years at IKEA Group, including as global forestry manager of supply chain. And she earned her master's in forestry from Yale School of the Environment. So again, a reminder to keep your questions coming in the chat as we go through our Q&A, my Q&A with Sophie before we open it up to your Q&A. So welcome, Sophie. Thank you again so much for joining us today.
I'm thrilled to be here, and it's great to see folks from all over the world. So thanks for tuning in radically different time zones.
Yes, we're always straddling that, I think, here with Walk of Life, which is the fun bit. So let's start with just, well, I'll let you introduce yourself if I missed anything in your intro, but also would love just to hear a little bit more about how we were talking about how we met and where and how we know each other. And then maybe just give us a bit of an overview of your role at International Paper.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, I think what you didn't include in your own description of your expertise is your excellent ability to make people look good no matter what. So you've just seen a real-time example of Shannon espousing all of the accolades that she could towards my own profile. So thanks for that intro. It was really very complimentary. I think that, Shannon, we go back at least a decade. And I would say that we probably first made contact at one of the Green Biz, now Trellis, conferences, which is a great opportunity for networking. And this is a super example because we connected, and over the years, you've been an incredible sounding board for me at different twists and turns in my career. And also we've done some specific work on some concrete items, and your coaching offering is really outstanding as well. So I would agree with all of the monikers that you described for your own work, from therapist to expert advisor. It all fits. So yeah, and I think just to kind of maybe elaborate a little bit on my role at International Paper. First of all, we're a global packaging company. Despite our name, we don't make pure paper, the kind that you would use in a copy machine anymore. We are about 126 years old, so we have a long history, started in North America and then have become global over time. And our industry is pretty common to sort of expand and contract. And so we are in a moment now in which we have become, as I said, a pure packaging company. And we are expanding that packaging footprint through an acquisition of a UK-based company called DS Smith. And so that deal will close early in January. And we're really excited to be connected with DS, who has a very strong identity when it comes to sustainability and circularity. So my role is sort of a full value chain view. And I think, like many CSOs, I kind of grew into this position over time, really starting with forest stewardship and our sourcing, and then expanding that approach through our manufacturing out to our customers and to sort of the end of use of our products. And I think that I have the benefit of, starting kind of from the sourcing piece, because it's given me time to work throughout the value chain, which also means that when I need to work back in our value chain, I have an understanding of where we start in terms of raw materials. And that's something I think we'll discuss a bit more today. And I should also say that my role over time has changed. At times I've been responsible for both the environmental and the social impact side. And today I'm focusing more on environmental, with other colleagues taking on some of our social and kind of community engagement work. So the way in which we interact and engage with our employees and the communities where we have operations.
Great, that's a wonderful intro, thank you. Let's dive into some nature-based solutions then. Tell us how you define that for yourself and or at International Paper. What is nature-based solutions, or what are?
Sure. I think, this is a phrase that's being used in a lot of different contexts. So the question is the right one, which is how do we as International Paper define it? And that's the same thing I would ask any company without making, or organization, without making an assumption. How does that definition really play out in one's own setting? So I think for IP, we sit at this really kind of interesting and complex intersection, in that our entire business model, like literally, is based on sustainable forestry. We live in this kind of complex center of the dependency on forests for renewable raw material, and then recognizing at the same time those are the engines for carbon storage and home to biodiversity. And so if we're really going to live up to our commitment, which is around sustainable packaging solutions, we have to think about every box as a nature-based solution. It's that the linkage is that tight, and it's not like that for every company. So we've focused that intent through our sustainability framework, which is called Vision 2030, and through a goal around healthy and abundant forests, which really includes two pieces: our sourcing of wood fiber and doing that responsibly, and also our partnership activities to really conserve and restore forest ecosystems. So I think about this in the context of nature-based solutions. For us are the actions and the initiatives that we take to really protect, manage, restore, conserve these forest ecosystems in order to help, and this is really an important point, to help sort of address societal challenges. And so it's not about us doing one or two or three actions on our own and that getting us to some sort of societal endpoint, but kind of working within the context of other organizations and companies focused on the same outcomes.
Great. That's super helpful to understand. I think it's important with all of the language we use in this impact space to always kind of ask that question, right? Of how do you define that key word or that key concept? Because I do think every company or every sector can maybe be looking at it differently. So why do you think that nature-based solutions are gaining so much momentum in sustainability strategies? And why are they actually really critical for businesses to adopt now, even beyond your sector or your company?
Yeah, I'm kind of loving this because like nature is having a moment, right? I've only been waiting for this for 22 years, people. Like this is really awesome for those of us who are grounded in the natural resource space. But even if you're not, if you just, I mean, I doubt there's anyone on this phone or on this call who hasn't had an experience in nature that inspires you. And I think about that a lot because especially this time of year, there may be a lot of boxes landing on your doorstep, and most likely you're more excited about what's in that box than the box itself. But for me, the box really reflects a lot of attributes that went into making it. And so the fact that the world at large is kind of turning to nature, and that's something that I'm very tuned into from my own interest and passion, is really exciting. I think, broadly speaking, the reason for that is that we've been sort of unilaterally focused on issues, right? Like climate. And we've been thinking about climate in the context of carbon emissions and accounting and footprint. And then there were some people from the side that were like, well, you can't really think about that unless you're also thinking about nature, because there's such a tight connection between the climate and nature space. And at the same time, most of the goods and services, most of the products out there in the world have some dependency on a natural input or element or something that's kind of connecting from the space of biodiversity or water or landscape level production. And so I think that nature's kind of getting to have a moment due to this sort of expanding scope of the ways in which people think about the things they use and really the impacts and dependencies and how those are really tied back to kind of a multiple or multi-attribute kind of ecosystem, really in the most broad sense. And I also think that there's an increasing realization in the climate space that resilience isn't just about climate resilience, it's about all of the elements of resilience at a landscape level from a land use perspective that kind of contribute to the ways in which we might address a warming climate.
Great. And what do you kind of see are the biggest challenges that organizations are facing when they're trying to incorporate this nature into their corporate strategies?
This, I think in a way it tracks with the earliest development of a lot of other attention to sustainability, quote, sustainability issues, and that we can't manage what we can't measure. So I think organizations who don't have the advantage that an international paper does of knowing that our most important raw material is renewable wood fiber, those who are farther away from those kind of natural inputs or resource related inputs, the first step there and the challenge I think for companies like that is really, how do I assess my risk without understanding my impact? And I think that that's where the next step is sort of like, well, how do I, if I understand my supply chain, how do I get really like data that is useful in this space, connected to my impacts, and then what do I do with it? So in a way, I think the challenges that we're facing right now are simply the challenges of getting started on something that is, in many cases, not going to be a standard methodology for every company. And I also think, as with anything else, and this is so true, I talk about this all the time, when it comes to nature and metrics or data that help us, that's decision useful in that context, sometimes those decisions are about, well, what do I do differently? But that doesn't necessarily mean that the intervention is going to lead to the outcome you really want. And nature doesn't just, you don't just like flip a switch and it turns on or it turns off. So these kind of, I would say, interventions take time to determine if real value is being delivered. And I've got a great example of this. This is actually perfect timing for this session, because I think it was yesterday was World Conservation Day, Wildlife Conservation Day. And I am really excited that we've been working in a partnership with the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, which is a US-based conservation group, for a very long time. And what we do with that group is we provide grants to smaller local partners for forest restoration and for work on habitats and species. And we're talking like we've been in this partnership for over a decade. So it was actually just announced recently that a previously listed threatened species, the red cockaded woodpecker, who depends entirely on specific longleaf forests of the US South, was just delisted, which is outstanding. What that means is that the work we've been doing, and others, not just IP, but and others, to ensure appropriate forest habitat for the red cockaded woodpecker, or the RCW, as we affectionately call it, has contributed to the bird's move from endangered to threatened. And that's a really big deal in terms of just like species numbers and viability. And so I think that's a huge win for wildlife and for biodiversity. But that didn't happen with one intervention. That was like a decade-long or more process. And I think that's part of the just kind of coming back to the question, that's like part of the challenge with getting started on addressing nature in your own strategy, which is, well, what do I do? And how do I get a result that's consistent with the outcomes I'm really hoping for?
So that's a good lead in, isn't it, to maybe shaping these 5 ways that a company can actually integrate nature into their sustainability strategies. Because I think, yeah, a lot of people are probably sitting here listening and going, okay, well, this all sounds good, but now what do we do? Like, how do we do this?
Sure.
So, yeah, and maybe take us, you could, of course, share us the journey you've been on with International Paper, but feel free to expand beyond that.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm a very step-by-step thinker. So I like to have a plan. So I think that this follows sort of for those who are familiar with the management, framework of like the plan, do, check, and adjust, right? It's a longer cycle on the plan, do, check, and adjust. But I really think, to my earlier point, starting by understanding impact and dependency. So understand the footprint and get visibility to the supply chain. Within that, you have to really identify what's most material. None of us can boil the ocean. It would be a poor use of resources to say, well, I'm going to address absolutely everything. Focus on the most material issues. and lean on partners to help figure that out. I don't think we could have been as successful as we've been on the ground without the support of the World Wildlife Foundation, Nature Conservancy, the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, American Forest Foundation. I mean, we don't just have partnerships because it makes us look good. We have them because we need to understand their perspective and help find effective solutions. So that's where I think partnerships really are helpful. That leads into just determining what data or information you might need to make decisions to sort of assess the change that you might make in your own strategy. Focusing on that and then being transparent about it, I think, is kind of the next step. That's critical. And we all live in a space in which all of the work that we've been doing that's the nice to have is increasingly regulated. And I'll speak a little bit about that, but with a nod towards the future and what might come in terms of regulation, being transparent about what you're focusing on and how you're going to achieve it is, I think, critical. And then I think aim for something, like set a goal or a target. And if it doesn't work or it doesn't make sense, you know, let's check and adjust. I feel like we're in a space right now where there's a little bit of grace for just doing something. Like the idea of just taking some initiative and making a start in this is really important. And that's where I think the transparency needs to be an element of it, because we all have to set a baseline on something and move towards a target, and being able to course correct along the way and have some humility with that, I think, is just critical to the whole approach.
Great. Can you give us an example? I don't know how much you get access to other companies and what they're doing, but do you have any from, you know, you've been in the space a long time, any other organizations that have successfully implemented one of these strategies, or any colleagues that you've worked with over the years, and then what impact that created, apart from the woodpecker? And that was a great example. But yeah, are there any organizations that you think, oh yeah, I look up to them, or they've done this well and this is their actual tangible impact?
Yeah, I think I'll mention one that's like way outside of our industry, of the forest product sector, and then I want to speak just a moment about sort of what sectors can do coming together in a pre-competitive space. So one that I think floats to the top particularly recently, and this is where you know, we can also provide a link to some background information, is Microsoft. And they've done some really good work recently, both on sort of like a full, for those who know Solitaire Townsend, a full kind of sphere of influence approach, which I really like. So the concept with spheres of influence is, it's not just about a data point and an accounting associated with that. It's about the things that I do, either because they're built into my strategy or my values, to have an influence outside of, you can say, sort of an accounting approach. And maybe that means policy advocacy or partnerships or some other approach. So in the context of Microsoft, really what I've seen them do recently, they just put out a really interesting report. They've done some projects on the ground. So that's really important, right? Let's see some on the ground work on water stewardship, on enhancing values of tropical forests. But they've also, because this is what Microsoft does best, they have developed some tools, also some AI elements, to create what I would call enabling conditions for tracking nature-related data. And I think that's a really important component of this, because the more data we want to work with, the more we need tools and resources to be able to get after it. So some of those things are satellite imagery for monitoring deforestation, for example. And Microsoft has worked with partners to collaborate, exchange learnings, and then to create visibility to the work. So I think they've done a really nice job. The title of their most recent report is called Investing in Nature for Sustainability. And I think Shannon dumped it in the chat there. But that's kind of an example of a company who you wouldn't think would be too tied into natural resources as part of their supply chain, but yet they're taking a big interest in it. Obviously, there's a high need for everyone who uses a Microsoft product to be thinking about that. And so they're both developing on the groundwork, as well as tools to kind of create the conditions for others to look more closely at their nature impacts. So I think that's a great kind of comprehensive example. My second example really comes from my work with the World Business Council for Sustainable Development and the Forest Solutions Group. So the Forest Solutions Group is a group of global forest products companies. I think we're close to 20 now. Everything from the largest landowners in the United States and in the world, really, to those who are manufacturing different kind of fiber-based products. And our role in coming together in this kind of pre-competitive space, I have to keep saying that so I don't get in trouble with my legal counsel, is that we really talk about, well, what are some of the solutions we can all engage on that are kind of the rising tide to lift our sector. So a product that we put out more than a year ago now is called the Nature Positive Roadmap for the forest product sector. It's available online. And that has really been instrumental in kind of outlining the actions that our sector can contribute to this societal goal of nature positive. And part of that is halting and reversing nature loss in working forests, and really thinking about the entire supply chain, even beyond forests, to take actions towards transformation. The follow-on to that body of work, which we're in the process of working on now and should really be released early next year, is developing some nature metrics that are consistent for the sector. So that's, I think, the next maturity step in this process, which is we're all working with our individual metrics. What are some common metrics that allow our stakeholders to really level set on what the sector itself can provide in terms of visibility and in terms of measuring and managing? So that nature metrics work is getting tied to a lot of other sectors. Agriculture and others in the WBCSD are super interested in having a similar approach. And so it's become a much larger body of work, and it will be publicly available to those who are interested. So two kind of different examples, but I think that there is a big role for collaboration in this space with others in the same sector, whether it's forest products or otherwise. And really that kind of helps us accelerate the work in order to get to things that are actionable.
Those are both very interesting examples. One being the kind of the convener, the WBCSD that's cross-sector, but also you're working within a specific kind of sector within them. And then you've got a tech firm like a Microsoft also. So I think it's really interesting to show how it's just really so much a cross-cutting issue that you could integrate into any strategy and use that great roadmap or framework, regardless of what your core business is, really.
Yeah.
So how do you kind of see this evolving in the next 5 years? What's any advice that you might give to leaders wanting to prepare for the shifts? I know it's hard to predict the future, but in terms of some of the trends you've seen in all your years of working in forestry and with nature, what are you expecting? What are you all preparing for in the next 3 to 5 years?
Yeah, well, I've already mentioned it, and I wouldn't say I embrace this, but it is a reality. We're all moving into a regulated space. Those who are in Europe are much more familiar and comfortable with it. Those of us in the US, I think, are lagging behind, but we're having to level up. So let's just go ahead and expect that everything that we think is voluntary now is at some point going to be regulated in terms of reporting, at least. I think reporting and disclosure, and Europe is leading the way on that with some of the new CSRD, Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive requirements. I think that we're seeing the early days of that play out through things like the Task Force on Nature-related Financial Disclosures, and some companies also in this voluntary world becoming more comfortable with moving to a science-based target for nature, which is sort of the parallel to science-based targets for climate. So as we all begin to move towards sort of targets and goals associated with this work, I think those are the pieces that will be kind of lifted into a regulatory space. The other thing that I think is happening in real time, and maybe some of you were aware of or participated in, the COP16, which is the biodiversity COP, which just happened in Cali, Colombia. It was a follow-on to the COP that was in Montreal, Canada, a year or two before, and it was really, I think, foundational in setting the stage for country level action, policy initiatives and needs, and also kind of corporate action on nature. So I think we're going to see a lot more momentum there. Business for Nature is one of the examples that I would pull from, just to kind of, if you're interested in what's happening in kind of both a policy as well as a corporate organizational space, the Business for Nature organization is doing a lot of good work in that. So I think we're going to see more iteration and policy development at the national and international level. I think the last thing, and this might be more hopeful than reality from my view, is that I hope we don't get so focused on metrics and reporting, because I'm feeling the stress of that now, and that's probably, I bet anyone else who's been in this space as long as I have is feeling the same. That we don't get so focused on that we really lose sight of a holistic approach. What really matters is, in my view, is sort of making change on the ground. So how do we make it real? And how do we show up as a company in our partnerships, in our policy advocacy, in our engagement with communities? And I haven't said very much about communities, but so much of these resource issues come down to those who own and manage the land, whether they're indigenous groups, or they are large landowners who are farming or operating commercially. I don't want to lose sight of that. It's a critical piece of this. And how do we invest in those resource owners for the future, so that we can incentivize decision making that lends itself towards nature positive outcomes? So everything I just said there in the last bit is really is the spheres of influence. So let's not get so caught up in getting the right metric that we lose sight of all the ways in which we need to kind of step up in order to make the climate and nature piece kind of real in terms of resilience.
I like that. That's a great kind of ending to the interview. Thank you, Sophie, for that really nice finale, because I think yes, all of us are feeling this pressure of data and regulation, and we feel, those of us that have been in this space for more than a few decades, we got so far beyond compliance, and now we feel like we might be right back where we were 10 years ago. But hopefully it will help to standardize things, and it will help to move the needle longer term, and we'll be back to the innovation and collaboration prioritization of this, in the next 2 or 3 years, once all these companies get a hang of how to do this compliance piece a bit more smoothly. So, well, thank you for all of those great tips and insights. We have one question already ready from Kim. Kim, if you want to unmute, you can just ask your question directly to Sophie. And everybody else, feel free to go ahead and pop your questions into the chat.
Thank you so much for giving an overview of how International Paper manages this. I'm really just actually more puzzled than anything. What is a regulated space actually look like for an organization like yours? I mean, is it within North America? Is there a particular agency you view as being your regulator? Or is it going to come through a corporate filing type of strategy?
Yeah, that's a really important distinction, and I should be more clear. I see it more right now coming through corporate disclosures, and where we are focused as a global company is really towards some of our European disclosure requirements. In addition, we're going through a process of a double materiality assessment right now, which sort of looks at both what are our impacts and dependencies and what are the things around us that are changing that might sort of have a financial implication for those sorts of impacts and dependencies. And that's really tightly related to what we then disclose. So I think for the moment, and probably for the next 4 years in the United States, we're going to be focusing more specifically on some of the corporate disclosures that we will be required to make associated with some of our European filing. I think in the US, we're not seeing, I would say, a regulatory push beyond what a state level expectation would be. And those are generally around sort of best practices for forest management, I think that's a pretty low risk space, but it doesn't, it's not the most influential thing for us. We're doing so much more work in the sustainable forestry space beyond kind of a state level best practice, that it's really going to be those kind of global corporate disclosures that are going to drive our action. Yeah, and someone mentioned about the California regulations, 100% on climate. I mean, yes, and thank you, California, for like keeping us on our toes, because if we can't meet those, we're not going to meet the European context at all. So that's exactly right.
Yeah, it definitely depends a bit on where you're operating, where you're sourcing from, where your customers and clients are. So I hear a lot of my California clients concerned about these regulations, what that's going to mean to their day jobs and how to respond to those. But thank gosh we have California pushing it forward, even with a new national government coming in. So Ivy, over to you. Thank you.
No problem. You mentioned CSRD requirements, which I think is everyone's focus. And I'm just curious what you're looking at with carbon offsets through some of the nature-based solutions. And, are they just in North America? There's a lot of focus on the global South. Is that something that you're looking at as well?
Yeah, great question. Carbon, I would say we are in the moment interested in carbon insets. So our work with the American Forest Foundation is heavily focused towards the Family Forest Carbon Program, which is really incentivizing improved forest management approaches, as well as afforestation of kind of a farm to forest model. We have not built into our strategy the use of offsets. I think that we are, like many companies, weighing what can we decarbonize in our own manufacturing footprint, which is our heaviest source of emissions. And in the future, what might we need to mitigate or neutralize through insets or offsets? I'm partial to value chain or close to value chain solutions for this, because I think there's so much potential, particularly in our primary sourcing region of North America, for improved forest management approaches. And so I think that we'll probably focus close to home first if and when we decide to move forward with this as part of our strategy. We haven't spent any time since we had operations in Brazil for a long time, but since we've moved out of that geography, we haven't spent any time looking at kind of offsets there. I would say this, I'm really enthusiastic about credible nature-based offsets. I think there's just a lot of good work happening there. There have been some big hiccups, and that's okay. We have to let things fail and move on and improve them. So I'm quite keen to sort of continue to work with the Family Forest Carbon Program and see how that might help us kind of get to our overall kind of climate goals in the longer term.
Great, thank you. Michelle, over to you.
Hey, yeah, I just wanted to, I'm changing the subject just a tiny bit and looking at extended producer responsibility and where your company stands on that, considering the different state regulations, very few coming out on that. But like, do you see a future in companies being responsible for how their consumers use their product in the future? Maybe paper, because the recycling industry is so strong, and cardboard and paper, y'all aren't thinking about it so much, but with some of these other industries, it's a kind of a big deal. So I was wondering what you were thinking about that.
Yeah, you described it really well. We have been very tuned in to state level EPR. I would say our advocacy for IP and the policy lobbying in the US has really been focused on exclusion of fiber-based packaging, simply because the recovery and recycling rate is so high. We've almost, I would say there have been experts who have said we've reached a practical maximum of the ability to recover and recycle those materials. So from the perspective of kind of protecting our industry, we're broadly supportive of EPR, but not of packaging, paper-based, fiber-based packaging being included in some of those state level provisions. That being said, there's very similar work underway in Europe. Again, they're farther along. We've done similar lobbying there, and I think that we'll be kind of looking very closely to see how things come out. I think, you know, broadly speaking, we benefit from having a naturally circular business model. But that said, we are not in everyone's home to encourage them to recycle those materials, nor does every municipality have options for individuals and communities. So that piece of it, that like end of use or end of life piece, really depends on working with local governments, working with local partners to incentivize and encourage recovery and recycling. And it's not something we can solve on our own. So I think we want to continue to sort of, in the context of what happens to our products when people are done with them, we want to continue to encourage and kind of facilitate that work. But in the meantime, EPR would be very difficult for us, simply from an economic perspective, to manage. And so we want to advocate for renewable fiber-based products to be excluded at the state level at this point.
So Sophie, do you want to give just your fellow change leaders here any one piece of advice as they go out to fight this fight in their own organizations?
Sure. I think your opening quote was perfect, Shannon, especially this time of year. My advice would be, don't forget to connect with the things that really bring you personal meaning and energy in order to then do this work. And as we're in a heavy holiday season, hopefully everybody gets a chance to spend some time with family and spend some time outside. And Shannon and I were commenting on that it's dark now, right? We're moving into the darkest time of year, and we're close to the solstice. And I find that a really special time to get cozy and to sort of celebrate bringing some light into the darkness. So I hope everybody has a really safe and happy holiday season and gets to kind of get out and connect with nature in some way, and then bring that inspiration back to the work we do. Because honestly, without that energy, this is a challenging time and a challenging space to be in. So we all need to kind of fuel our work through something that's more personal.
Love that. You couldn't have said it better. So thank you, Sophie, so much for your time today and all your insights and wisdom. Really appreciate all of that and look forward to seeing the article take shape.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.